Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Seventh Eye. So I had a number of responses to my last Seventh Eye video which I was talking about forces of darkness and reconsidering how we interact with the forces of darkness in perhaps a new perspective, perhaps looking at spiritual attack in a slightly different way. So I did receive some interest and some notes, and I'm going to read one of them and respond to hopefully everything I've received in regards to that video, Spiritual Eye number 11, regarding darkness so far. Hi, Mary. Just a quick note to say how much I appreciated the video. So very timely in the moment. There are some very damaged beings out there, and a lot of stuff in our collective national shadow is coming up for healing. At times, I struggle to maintain my equilibrium and compassion. Your video is helpful to me. The question. I am an African American woman. There are forces actively working to roll back the basic civil rights that my ancestors fought so hard to achieve. They are even trying to rewrite history. I must be a steadfast warrior in opposition to this, but must also maintain my compassion for all, even the so-called enemies. I do understand that at a spiritual level, I am learning from this, but in the day-to-day, it's hard. I see a lot of my friends becoming bitter and hateful in response, which is what I believe that is exactly what the forces of destruction want. The downfall of compassion and empathy. I'm keeping afloat, but just barely. Any suggestions or thoughts? So yes, we are living right now in an era of the shadow, and one of the ways that we can conceptualize this is, I'm going to use an ocean metaphor, is that all of our wounds, all of our hatred, our ignorance, our fear, our anger, our rage, all of that typically is always present, but it's at the ocean floor. It doesn't come up for air, doesn't come up for breath. And when stuff is, kind of in more of a light era, we don't necessarily have the call, or the need or even the awareness sometimes to recognize things that are so far below the surface. And so this may sound entirely hopeful of me, but one of the things that can be understood energetically is that in eras of darkness like this, that it is sort of like a tide coming into shore, and it is unearthing that ocean floor so that many of us can see it, and notice it and do work both externally and internally in regards to it. So it sounds cheesy of me to say, or maybe disregarding of a very struggle-filled reality, to say on a personal level that there can be a lot of personal work done, because there are a lot of people who are not in a place to do personal work. They are just sort of struggling to get by in the modern world. So I will say that for people who are struggling to get by, it is important to recognize that there are a lot of unfortunate, difficult, and quite frankly, dark forces that are around us right now. And the most compassionate thing that you can offer yourself is some grace, is to recognize, hey, this is more than just me. The world is really hard at this moment. How can I proceed forward with empathy and grace and compassion for myself? For those of us who can do work on ourselves, this is an enormous opportunity to look at our own divisions. When I say, we can look at our own hatred, our own dehumanization, look at our own ignorance, most people are going to be rightfully say, "Oh, yay!" that isn't exactly fun work to do, but it is important work to do because the person who wrote me this note is incredibly correct. What darkness desires is to bait us, is to get us into a place of immobilization, into a place of fear, into a place of hatred, into a place in which we are so busy tearing ourselves down, tearing one another down, that we do not notice that there are larger forces that are shaping our world, shaping our collective, that are doing things like taking away our rights, um, while we are so focused on tearing one another down, or focused on hatred, anger, pain, suffering, bitterness. And so I will be the first person to say is that if you are having an emotional reaction to the world right now, good, you should be. There is this idea of this sort of, I guess, Zen style thought that if you only get enlightened enough, you are not going to feel anything. And that isn't what happens. What happens is that you do feel. You feel enormously, but it no longer, I'm going to mix metaphors, it no longer is like a tide pulling you under. Emotions can pass through you and be felt, even really large ones, and can release from your energy field. They're not held on to. What happens when we really hold on to, when we grip tightly to our emotions, is that it is easy for all of them to turn toxic. It is easy for all of them to turn into so much pain and suffering and darkness. And when that happens, what happens is that we no longer wish to look at it. We can no longer acknowledge it within ourselves because it becomes too painful. And so what happens is that we push that hatred, that ignorance out onto convenient others. So I think that the first way to navigate your way is always understanding. And this helps to bring clarity. And clarity is always necessary for healing because if there is a part of us that isn't at a point of clarity, isn't at a point of total acceptance, there's still going to be conflict within ourselves, which is hard. One of my favorite descriptions of spiritual awakening, or the goal of it, is the end of conflict. And that means being able to see things and people and the world and what is going on from a clear perspective, even if it is a painful one. So, so let's talk about two of the largest forces of darkness, hatred and ignorance. Let's talk about what those actually are. So, ignorance is the opposite of awareness. We do things without awareness of the or full understanding of our motivations for doing something, for what type of energy we are sending out in the world. I always tell people that one of the first steps to kind of know that you are spiritually awakening, one of the first thresholds is that you start to notice other people and you start to be aware of reciprocity. Basically, what am I giving out versus what am I taking away? And so people who have not crossed that first threshold of awareness are going to be people that are caught in an enormous amount of ignorance. And this is not necessarily malevolent. A lot of times it is just simply clueless. There is no awareness about how they are repeating the cycles of their childhood, no understanding or curiosity regarding how things outside of a very small spectrum of reality work. Um, and there is often, kind of a thought that their version of reality, their whatever that may be, is the correct version, and everybody else is incorrect or evil or wrong, or, insert adjectives here. And so the best way that I can describe this type of ignorance is a lack of, like I said, a lack of awareness for what sort of energy is being sent out, a lack of awareness of motivation of being. For example, I will share that obviously I am not African American, so there's only so much that I can talk about regarding that because it is not my lived experience. Um, I will say though, as a woman, that I am a spiritual teacher. I've mentioned this before, but I am frequently on the receiving end of emails in which people are expressing their ignorance towards me. There is a basic lack of awareness that if my name were Mark rather than Mary, that their email to me would be completely different. And often these are individuals who believe themselves to be quite conscious, but they are not yet at the point of understanding that their email to me was not sent in good faith. The energies behind their email, the, sort of pedantic lectures that are sometimes there. And my reaction to this is not what they want. What they want is for me to feel small, for me to feel powerless, and for them to feel larger. What they are doing is expressing their own ignorance and their own self-hatred. They do not have the awareness yet to understand that they would never send what they are sending to me to somebody who is male or male presenting. But because my name is Mary, they are sending it. So I'm offering this as an example from my daily life because these individuals aren't necessarily like kind of evil supervillains. They're often clueless individuals who are confusing the first step of their path for the last, and may have in fact been spinning their wheels for a long time because if you are ignoring, if you are in hatred for women, you are in hatred for half of yourself, half of your being. And so that's a very big stumbling block for a lot of people. And this goes for any hatred of the other as well. What I will say, and some people may rightfully argue with this categorization, but when we are considering what is kind of the definition of other, it is considered to be anyone that is female and anyone that is African American, anyone that is in American society, anybody that is a skin color other than white, and specifically a white Christian male ideal. And so if you send me your hate mail regarding that, I understand. I will just delete and block. But the reason that I am sharing this is that when we consider this conceptualization of the other, we can understand how much ignorance a lot of people are truly suffering under. Even people that are interested in spiritual matters will suffer under this because their recognition of the other may not be pure hatred. It is something within this, under the surface of their selves, something that is subconscious that they're still living out that they do not have awareness of. For example, another thing that people rightfully give me flack for sometimes is a discussion of modern shamanism about how it is in a loop, basically, about how what happens with it is that it is cycling through and cycling through something that is called the colonization loop. in which it is easy to romanticize or fetishize other countries, other cultures, other people. But if you notice that conceptualization is always about a white male explorer type going into the other, learning those ways, taking and bringing back. And so I mention this because a lot of us are really comfortable in our ignorance. It offers us safety. One of the things that I've been noticing very much lately is a collective movement towards understanding the dark feminine. And I think that this is wonderful. But in order for it to meet kind of the masses, one of the things that it needs to do is to come through the perspective of a white middle-aged dude. And so when it comes through that perspective, there is little awareness that part of the seed of the dark feminine is understanding the history, oppression, experiences of very human women. It denies and pushes aside the rage, the feminist movements, the basically I think that everybody who is wanting to engage with the dark feminine should read the yellow wallpaper and write a book report about it. It's a short story you can find online if you haven't heard of it, but it is one of the first feminist tales that really shows how women are treated and how that, in fact, creates the sort of craziness or mad woman sort of archetype that so many women are blamed and suffer under. So let's get back to basics. If we are looking at ignorance, it is a lack of awareness. There are plenty of people that do this without malice. However, their actions that they carry out do create suffering. They do create, just like the people that I talked about that email me, or people who treat others through what we might call microaggressions, or people who may even go the other side and romanticize or fetishize something without truly understanding it. I will bring in another thought, which is difficult, but it is something that is pertinent to this discussion, particularly to this reader, which is that for a long period of time, I studied root work and different forms of spiritual bathing and spiritual cleansing in particular. What happened to me is that I found a teacher who was willing to teach me, but he was very clear in telling me that the work that he shared had kind of an outer and an inner circle, and that he was happy to share what was kind of in his outer circle, what he could share, what his spirits told him were okay to share with me. But the rest, the sort of inner circle, were specifically for people that were from his lineage, from his tradition, and I was not. And so that really provided a wonderful wake-up call for me. It was not like I wasn't aware of this overall, but um, to really understand um, how not all knowledge is for everyone. But back to ignorance. So let's talk about this like this. Picture that somebody is in a very small room. It is completely lit. They know the corners of that room because it is small. There is not much space. The idea of there being other rooms in that house or a world at large is frightening. It is scary. And so, what people who are stuck in ignorance do is to ensure that anything beyond that small room is hated, is dismissed, is rejected, is feared, so that their awareness has specific limits to it. anything else to them would be too scary. And so the process of spiritual awakening is recognizing that there are other rooms there, and gradually that there's a whole town and a whole block and a whole city and a whole world out there filled with all sorts of others. And those others may have different viewpoints, different religions, different ways of being, different experiences of this reality. And at first, the path is very much about acknowledging the humanity of each person that you meet. This is the path of shadow work, where you meet people in your reality and you could see, how am I a mirror to that person? What can I see in them that is also of me? What is of me that is also within them, seeing those commonalities. And as you're willing to expand the room that you are in, you will come across different knowledge, different people, different experiences of reality that will conflict with that room that you're in. And there is a choice whether to hold on to ignorance, whether to keep the known intact, whether to keep yourself in that one small room or two small rooms, or maybe a small house, or whether to expand your identity and your definition of reality further. I talk a lot about how emotions are specific messengers. And so I feel like a lot of people these days can really understand this. Like, grief is saying something to you, particularly anger is saying something in particular to you. But if we were talking about something like hatred, it offers a very specific message, and it is a message of fear. It is a message saying that I feel a lack of safety. I wish to remain in the known. Any person, any conceptualization of reality, any thought that will cause for them to look beyond that small room that they are in is something to be feared and thus hated, because it poses a lack of safety. We can be assured in our ignorance. We can be assured in that small room. To expand into another room and another room and another room is scary. There is a famous quote that is, most people like to have their own thoughts repeated back to them. And what you will find is that, and I've talked about this several times before, what causes for people to really engage with spiritual awakening, to have quote unquote success with it, isn't necessarily things like that, that people point out, like past lives, or even practices or length of practices that people have done, because it is so easy to hang our hats on things. And obviously, if you're somebody who has meditated for 20 years, maybe you've expanded your consciousness a bit. But there's also a fact that there are some people that spiritually awaken and massively expand their identity, their sense of reality within 6 months. And there are people that have been on a spiritual path for 60 years, and all they have done is sort of consolidate and confirm the corners of the room that they're in. And it has everything to do with curiosity. Curiosity and openness is the one factor that will let somebody move beyond the ignorance that they have into awareness. And so let's talk about this basic sense of safety. We often don't recognize that this is the true message of hatred, and it is why so many people act the way that they do, why they are ignorant, why they wish to strip history, why they act with such hatred and malice towards other people. Because we can point our finger towards ignorance, of course. But the other factor really is fear, and it's a basic fear of safety. And what we try to do when we feel unsafe is attempt to control. And the more unsafe that we feel, the more control we attempt to exert. We attempt to exert control over other people, um, over the world, kind of it spreads out from there. One of the reckonings of spiritual awakening is recognizing on deeper and deeper levels how little control we have, or sort of right sizing that control. We have control over um, our own emotional intelligence, our own responsibility to self. We have control over a fair amount of things in our own individual life, but even then, there are greater forces shaping us, and we certainly don't have control over other people or what is going on in a national level. And so this question and this talk really hits at the heart of things, which is that if we have not experienced safety within the self, safety in early childhood, in our environment, either due to our parents or due to our environment overall, for example, growing up in a neighborhood that wasn't safe, it is difficult for us to feel safe within ourselves. And so what happens with that lack of safety is that it is very easy to feed into. It is easy for kind of the forces of darkness to tap it on the shoulder and say, you should be afraid. You should be afraid of everything that is not outside of what you have defined as this very clearly lit room. Everything else is invasive, it is predatory, it is harmful, it is out to get you. And if you notice these narratives in our reality, and if you, on a collective level, you can also notice them on an individual level. For example, there is a lot of discussion regarding cluster B personality disorders right now. Narcissism, I just did a video on borderline personality disorder. And this is coming up for a very specific reason. And that is that those individuals are so stuck in a safe state of fear, a state of lack of safety, that what they do in reality is quite unfortunate. They intend to provoke, prod, to create situations that prove that they are correct, that they're the victims, that they're the ones being attacked, that reality or the people in it or their family members or whomever is out to get them, that they are not lovable, they are not likable, they are not worthy. And so, if we consider this message of hatred, I talked about the process of shadow work in which we see ourselves mirrored in another person back and forth. And this can lead somebody through so much enormous benefit and just wonderful terrain of self. We push everything outside of our conscious awareness, everything that is steeped in ignorance within ourselves, out onto the world and out onto other people. This is called projection. I go over all of this in my shadow workbook. But one of the things that we can do is that if we are willing, we can notice the people we keep on running into again and again that trigger us. We can notice the types of people we run into that bother us. We can, even if we're willing to, notice the people that we hate. And for most of us engaged in this work, it will not be an active hatred. It will be a dislike, a distrust, a fear, or just a sense of separation. This person is unlike me. And that may very well be true in a variety of ways. But there are also ways through connecting with shadow work, through connecting with empathy, in which we can feel empathy for people who are stuck in fear, who are stuck in ignorance, who feel that sense of lack of safety. Those are all very enormously human things. And so there is a recognition that we can have empathy for people who are so stuck in that one room that is brightly lit, and anything outside of it, any further education, information, any further insight is a true danger to them. And so there can be compassion for recognizing that this person is essentially like agoraphobic within their own consciousness, where everything is treated as hatred, where everything is treated as an invader. And so the real question is what to do about all of this. I do find that recognition brings a lot of compassion, and doing shadow work really gets people to a place of equanimity. But there is an edge to shadow work, and that is that after you've done your shadow work, you come to a point of recognition that you know what? I can see my humanity in this person. I too have felt hatred, I felt pain, I felt suffering, and this person in front of you is within an enormous amount of ignorance or suffering that they may not realize. Certainly, if somebody is actively engaged with the force of hate, they're experiencing enormous suffering. But there are plenty of people that are in that room that are perfectly content within that one room, and they are not fueled by hate or by fear. They are fueled by what is comfortable to them. There is simply no reason for them to expand their consciousness, for them to explore other rooms of that house. They are fine within that narrow confine of what they consider reality and blocking them everything else out. They have the capacity and the privilege, quite frankly, to be able to do so. But there is also a point that people get to where they have done their shadow work, they've done enormous self work on themselves, and they realize that other people around them are making different choices than them, particularly morally, but just in the way that they interact with reality, the way that they interact with other people. For example, I get a lot of people who have suffered enormously as children, and they come to a point where they can feel recognition of the humanity of their parents. They can understand that trauma begets trauma, hatred begets hate, suffering begets suffering. But they also recognize with a startling clarity at some point that they have made different choices. That despite their suffering, despite whatever emotions they feel within, they have not poison the world with them. They have not put those onto other people, or if they have, there's been a process of working through their issues so that they no longer do so or do so to the extent that they once did. And that is enormously courageous. You know, whenever I get somebody into me who expresses, hey, I recognize I feel an incredible amount of hatred towards, you know, put person, class, caste, color of skin, religion, whatever, philosophical, spiritual persuasion here, that takes an enormous amount of courage to be willing to acknowledge and look at. And so, on one level, all of us can look within ourselves and see and do our shadow work and recognize that where we dehumanize others, where we hate others, and develop that mirror within ourselves. But after that, we do need to recognize that there are people in this world that are comfortable in that room, and there are people that are so lost within their suffering that any desire to control them, to make them see the light, to help them expand in any way into another room is going to be a lost cause. Um, Although people don't like to think about this, it can be an enormous breakthrough for people to recognize that some people in this lifetime take a single step, others take several giant leaps, and some people may in fact regress. Some people may accumulate more karma, they may become darker, they may become more unfortunate, they may treat other people so poorly that that room they're in even gets smaller and smaller with age, because nobody wants to be around somebody that is so filled with hate. And so there are a couple steps that I will share. The first is to recognize clearly what is going on. And this can be done compassionately. Oh, this hatred is a message of lack of safety. Oh, this person is, incredibly ignorant. And this is not to be done in a dismissive way or contemptuous way. It is a clear, dispassionate understanding of where that person is and sort of the edges of their reality. This can save people an enormous amount of heartache because you are not going to convince somebody to move beyond that room until they are ready to, and until their hand is on that door, so to speak. Um, and learning which people have openness and which do not can be enormously helpful for all of our sanities. The second step is doing shadow work, is to lead with empathy, to recognize what part of you relates to the person or the situation that is going on personally or collectively. Can you see the same fears? Can you see the same ignorance, even though by its very definition, ignorance is difficult to see? Can you see divisions that play out within you, like play out in the world? And for doing all this, I suggest my book, Shadow Work for the Soul. The third part of this is to recognize that you as an individual likely act and are of a moral fiber, or approach the world with a different sense of faith, a different sense of regard than where other people are. And so actually seeing the differences between yourself and other people can be enormously helpful. Because one of the things that happens, especially at extremes, is that we don't wish to fully accept what is going on. Because to accept what is fully going on means accepting that another person is filled with hate and ignorance. And if we were to accept that, we would rightfully feel fear within, and we would rightfully need to regard our own fear, lack of safety, hatred that was within ourselves. And so my advice will always be to feel whatever your feelings are, know that they are right, know that they are valid, know that they are understandable, especially given the actions of people to really truly harm other people out of their own sense of ignorance and self-hatred, and feelings of lack of safety. But then it is to fully accept the situation, which is enormously difficult because we do have this reflective capacity within ourselves. It is difficult to understand that truly some people are lost. Some people are enormously lost in the darkness. They are so overloaded, overwhelmed by their own hatred, by their own suffering, by their own pain, that their only response to it is like an animal in a cage where they're just lashing out with teeth and claws and everything that they have, in order to keep their reality intact. And so if we fully accept this, and it is a hard thing to have anybody accept, we can accept the darkest aspects of ourselves. We can recognize that the darkest aspects of human nature do come from this place where people may not always wish the best for other people, in which people actively may, with glee, harm other people, where people may be so lost in their ignorance that they just go along with whatever somebody else says, because part of the reason why, we there's a large part of us that is always looking for a mother or father figure, somebody else to think for us, because critical thinking is hard. And so people who willfully keep themselves in that room are continually looking for somebody to think for them, to play the mother-father role for them, to tell them what is right, to shape their reality for them. Those who are spiritual awakening will gradually move away from this and start to think for themselves and start to understand things from their perspective rather than their gurus, or rather than a political leader, or rather than what some media company wants you to think or believe. And so, where does this lead all of us? Clear recognition of reality, clear recognition that, yes, the forces of darkness want for you to be mired in hatred and pain. They wish to drag you down to their level. That is their purpose. They wish to goad you, to antagonize you, to create harm for you. And this darkness will go after the brightest lights. They will wish to make others who have light feel small, feel powerless, to feel as much fear and pain as they are feeling within. And so if we are willing to fully recognize and feel this, does that make things okay? No, it doesn't. But it tends to cause for people to look a little bit away. There is a difference between being informed and being obsessed or being enmeshed. And one of the things that we can do externally is to quit giving our time and energy and emotions essentially feeding that darkness, feeding that fear, feeding that process of that darkness that feeds on all of the emotional reactions. Picture our national energy right now like a huge energy vampire. What does it want to do? It wants to goad you. It wants to get you to feel especially really tasty feelings like hatred, pain, suffering, because that's what it can feed on. That's what perpetuates that cycle. And so anybody who is not willing to feed the monster, so to speak, can step away from that and can start bringing their light into the world, can recognize when people are filled with darkness and are attempting to bring you down. And that is not a cause for hatred. It is not even a cause for thinking that they are, pathetic or unfortunate or anything like that. It is a cause for recognizing what they are trying to do, even if they are not aware of it themselves, and how small and unfortunate and everything that comes with it the person is. And that inspires compassion rather than hatred and rather than division, because what people who are filled with hate do not expect is empathy. What they are expecting is somebody to tell them how horrible they are, how awful they are, to basically go against them, to feed their hatred, to feed into their ideology that everyone is against them, that everybody is seeking to go against them and do battle with them. And so lead with your light as much as possible. In an external way, we often don't recognize how these small things to benefit our communities, to benefit our culture, to benefit the world really do. And so one of the things that I recognized long ago is that when you bring your light into the world, when you bring your genuine self into the world, and you actually see somebody, and this could be a person, it can also be an animal, it could also be, quite frankly, the grass outside or a tree outside, when you are actually able to connect to them with some sense of genuineness and tell that person that they are doing a good job, that they what they shared with you is special and amazing. If you are bringing some genuine light into the world and reflecting back to that person or that animal or that tree their good aspects, that person will genuinely appreciate that no matter where they are on their path. But especially for people who are struggling, they may be so locked within an internal dialogue within themselves, so locked within their suffering, that they are expecting reality to be harsh and horrible to them. That any light that you can bring them can be enormously helpful, even if it is incredibly small. So that is where I will leave things. It is an enormously complex discussion. Feel free to offer your thoughts below, but one of the ways to really work with this is to see darkness clearly for what it is, for what its motivations are, to recognize the fear, insecurity, lack of safety, and to let ourselves remain light as much as possible. And part of remaining light is feeling everything we need to feel: shock, fear, anger, fury, whatever, grief, whatever comes up, and then letting it move through us so we can remain a sort of steadfast light in the world that desperately needs hope, that desperately needs light, that desperately needs people who are willing to look at themselves and to look at other people in a light-filled way.